Good afternoon, everyone. Excited to have you all here for our webinar, A Conversation with Rachael Wagner. And hopefully you all, after this or before you came here, have been able to enjoy the lovely weather that we're having so far today, thank goodness. Today's recorded event is hosted by Nebraska Women in STEM, an initiative led by Nebraska Cures and Bio Nebraska. So at Nebraska Women in STEM, we are driven by a mission to reduce barriers for women in STEM and to create an environment in Nebraska where they can thrive in their chosen careers. Part of that mission is bringing to you conversations like this one today. We're really excited to have Rachael join us to talk about her work at Virtual Incision. Virtual Incision is a Bio Nebraska member, and they have developed MIRA, a first of its kind miniaturized surgical robot. Um, it's all way above my head, Rachael, so I've tried to sum it up the best that I can, and excited for you to dive in more about that. Virtual Incision has seen some pretty amazing milestones recently. You may have heard about them. One of them is MIRA, the surgical device, went to space. How cool is that? And the company also announced last month that their device has received FDA approval for some certain surgical procedures. I got the opportunity to visit Virtual Incision before they moved out of Nebraska Innovation Campus last year. And so I was at their Innovation Campus location and got to check out the robot in person, which was really cool. And they had mentioned that they had submitted the FDA application, which is lots and lots of pages. And Rachael, I understand you worked on some of that as well.
Yeah.
So very, very exciting to have FDA approval and move forward with that. I'll now pass things off to my Nebraska Women in STEM colleague and Executive Director of Nebraska Cures, Amanda McGill Johnson, who will talk to Rachael about the essential role she has played in making all of these exciting things at Virtual Incision happen.
Thank you, Sasha. And like she said, we are so excited to have Rachael Wagner here with us today. Rachael is a biomedical engineering PhD student at the University of Nebraska Lincoln, who was, as you just heard, part of a team to send the surgical robot into space. Her research interests include space technology and surgical robots. She graduated with a bachelor's degree from UNL in 2018 and worked at Virtual Incision there in Lincoln before pursuing her graduate degree. Rachael, welcome.
Hi, thanks for having me, everyone.
Well, you've been part of a project that's been making headlines over the last few months.
Mhm.
Before we get into what it's like working with NASA and sending your robot into space, tell us about this surgical robot and what problems you're hoping this robot will solve.
Yeah, thanks for that question. I'm really excited about this robot. I've been kind of involved with it more or less for like 5 or 6 years now. And the I guess the big thing that this robot can do, even though it's very small, is be able to perform surgeries in a minimally invasive way. So typically, surgeons, when they're opting to do a tricky surgery or maybe a hard case, they prefer to use a surgical robot opposed to a laparoscopic technique or an open technique because it's a lot better for them and it's a lot better for the patient. And so we like robotic surgery. We think that's great. However, current surgical robots are usually pretty expensive and they're also pretty big. And so coming up with a design for a smaller device that can still perform the surgery in a way that surgeons like, but in a way that's less expensive and more accessible is really good. So that's kind of why we're excited about this device.
Yeah, very exciting. So now let's dig in. Tell us about your experience working with NASA and doing your research over the last few months.
Yes. I made some slides with some pictures, so I'll probably try to share screen here, so you guys can see all the exciting stuff. Here we go. Might take it a second. Think it went.
It did.
Awesome. Okay. So we actually began this project in 2022 when NASA awarded us a grant to send the MIRA robot to the International Space Station. They have approved our design to put the MIRA inside something called an express rack locker, which is the standard experiment bay on the space station, and it's very similar to like a mid deck locker on the space shuttle, if you're familiar with that. But they are interested to see what surgical robotics would look like in microgravity as we are traveling farther and farther into space. You might have heard we're hoping to get a lunar base soon, go back to the moon, and then potentially go to Mars here in the next couple of decades, which I think is really exciting. And so as we are going further and deeper into space, we might have to do surgery at some point. And like I said, surgeons prefer to use robots. And so robot technology might be able to help us even in really extreme environments. So why the MIRA robot? Well, most typical surgical robots are very large. They are about the size of a refrigerator is what we say, and they cost millions of dollars and weigh a ton or several tons, depending on the model. So the MIRA, which you can see on the right here, was ideal because it is less than 2 feet long and weighs less than 2 pounds, which when you're sending something to space, weight and size really matter a lot. This is a bit of a deeper dive into what the MIRA looks like. It's, like I said, about 2 feet long, so fits on the ISS. It's got 2 6-degree freedom arms, which are kind of similar to the arms that you and I have, meaning that it can move its shoulder joints, its elbow joints, in order to position itself in the workspace in the body. It's also got a robotic camera that can position to look at anywhere the arms can reach. Oh, is there a question?
Nope, I think somebody's mute.
Oh, okay. I'll continue. So it's got 2 surgical instruments and an endoscope camera that can be used to perform surgery. So the camera can point anywhere within the robot's workspace to view what it's working on. And then it's got a grasper and scissor that are used for dissection and resection of tissue during surgery. So that's kind of a high-level overview about the MIRA. And then this is the overall operations concept that NASA approved for our experiment. So we would send the robot to the ISS in order to complete surgical exercises inside that express rack locker, like I mentioned. And then we would have a data link to the International Space Station where we would be able to send robot control signals up from a surgeon and then robot video down back to the surgeon in order for them to control the robot in real time to perform simulated surgery. So kind of a big connection between the ISS all up in space and then a surgeon on the ground being able to perform surgery. So in order to accomplish this, we actually built 3 prototypes over the course of the 2 years that I mentioned. We started off with a very basic prototype that you see here on the left. It's just the robot, some stands to hold the robot, and something called a task board. And this task board is where we would have our simulated surgical tasks that the robot would perform in space. But with this model, we really wanted to get a good idea of the sizing that we would see in the Express Rec Locker and what would be possible for that task board, because typical simulated tasks that surgeons will practice with on Earth rely heavily on gravity, which we would not have on the ISS. So then we built our second prototype, and that's shown in the middle here. And this prototype was fully functional, meaning that it really emulated exactly what we wanted to do with the device that was sent to space. And so you can see there's a lot of electronics and computer circuit boards within the box that allowed the robot to be controlled and have that network connection. We also tested some different task board designs and different surgical tasks. And we really developed what we wanted the final version of our device to look like with that second prototype. And then we have the third prototype, which you can see here on the right. And this is the one that is nearly identical to what we sent to space. As you can see, a lot of the similar elements from the second prototype are again reused in the third prototype, except for this. We have custom parts and everything is being made out of aluminum or stainless steel, because NASA does not want us to send plastics to the ISS because they are flammable. So the third device is the one that we really thought would be mimicking our final version. So we took that and we worked with NASA on its design. So actually for about a year, I met with NASA every week to discuss our progress on testing and finalizing the design of that third prototype you saw there. They had a lot of engineers helping give some advice and expertise on these different areas that are important to making sure that we meet NASA requirements. So we had human factors engineers helping us make sure that the astronaut interfaces made sense and that there was proper labeling and no sharp edges that the astronauts would be exposed to. We also had to integrate our software and electrical to the ISS. And so they provided some information about what is on the ISS and what standards we had to meet in order to comply with the ISS requirements. And then we also did a lot of work with the safety team to make sure that what we were sending wouldn't cause any issues on board the ISS. So lots of feedback, lots of meetings, but we did end up with, I think, a pretty good design. Here is a picture of the control panel that we worked with our human factors team to create. And so this is what the astronauts actually used on the ISS. They have a power switch, Ethernet and power connections, and then an operation mode switch that they could toggle between the two different modes that the payload would do. And then of course you can see all the labeling and some guarding just in case, the astronauts are floating around up there. You don't want them to accidentally brush against your power switch and shut everything off. So kind of a fun experience to think about designing something to be used in zero-G. We also had to label everything on the inside. And as you can see, they were a little worried about the scissors on the surgical robot, even though they are very small. But we needed to make sure that we put proper warning labeling on the device and then near the device, so that way the astronauts wouldn't actually accidentally come in contact with those scissors. Because an astronaut getting a paper cut is a very, very bad thing in space. So then once we felt pretty confident with our NASA team that our third prototype was ready, we then began the testing phase. And this was used to prove to ourselves that we did in fact meet all the requirements that we've been designing to. So we started off with power quality testing. We actually traveled to Huntsville, Alabama to Marshall Space Flight Center in order to test this in person with NASA. And the reason they do this is because there is only one express rack, which you can see on the left there, which is the cabinet that our locker goes into. There's only one express rack on Earth, and there's only one power supply on Earth that matches exactly what's on board the ISS. So they wanted to make sure that we were fully compatible with the tech that we would see up in space. So we performed this test. We also did electrical compatibility testing. And so this was to determine what electromagnetic waves the payload would emit while it was turned on. So pretty much anything that runs on electricity does emit some sort of wave into not the visible spectrum of light, but the broader spectrum. And so we wanted to make sure that what we were emitting wouldn't interfere with anything else on the ISS. And so obviously that's important so that way you don't interfere with other electronics that are performing important functions, whether it be for safety or life support. So we basically went into a giant, it's called an anechoic chamber, but it's a 10-foot by 10-foot by 10-foot cube that is a Faraday cage. So it's completely insulated from Wi-Fi, cell phone signals, anything in the outside world, and it's used to completely isolate only what our device emits. So that was a very interesting and informative experience, and we were able to get our payload design to pass. Next, we did some vibration testing. So in order to go to space, you have to take a ride on a rocket, and those are notorious for being very, very, very bouncy or bumpy of a ride, so to speak. And so we needed to make sure that the payload would be able to survive the vibration that it would see during the rocket launch. So we put the payload on the shake plate that would emulate the forces that it would experience during launch, and made sure that everything was able to be the same in the same state before and after the test, and that everything was fully functional after we vibrated the robot and the payload. Next, we had to do acoustic testing, which I was not expecting to have to do because relatively our payload is quite quiet. But anything that goes to space that could cause some white noise, we did have a small fan in our payload, could potentially be a hazard for the astronauts and their hearing. And you definitely do not want to give them a headache by emitting this high-pitched buzz that could drive them nuts. So we needed to make sure that we were below the minimum sound requirement or the maximum sound requirement for payloads. So we went inside another foam-covered room. So it was very, very quiet in there. And then we used an acoustic meter to measure the sound coming off of our device to make sure that it was below the levels that it needed to be. And then some of the last tests we did were for temperature. And so we performed airflow testing to make sure that we get adequate cooling to the payload and that we wouldn't necessarily be able to propel a fire on the ISS. If you have too much airflow, that could potentially happen. And then we also wanted to make sure that when we were powered on for a long period of time, we wouldn't overheat and accidentally burn someone. So you can see on the right side, the payload is fully insulated on all sides by the foam, except for the front panel. And we wanted to see how hot the payload would get in this worst case condition and make sure it was below the requirements, which thankfully the payload passed all these tests. So that was really great, which meant that we were ready to ship it off and send it to NASA for the launch. So we ended up shipping the payload in November in order to launch on NG-20, which is a collaboration between Northrop Grumman and SpaceX. So they had a Northrop Grumman cargo capsule spacecraft aboard the Falcon 9 rocket that did launch out of Cape Canaveral in Florida, go up to the ISS. And this took place on January 30th of this year. So that was really exciting. I actually did get to attend the launch in person. And I've seen videos and stuff of rocket launches, but it is just so loud and so bright. I feel like cameras and videos don't really capture how crazy it is to go to space, really. So thankfully, the launch went well, and we were ready to perform our experiments. So just as a reminder of what our concept of operations was, is that we'd have the robot complete some surgical exercises within the locker, the box that you saw, and then we would try to control the robot from the ground using a surgeon to perform those surgical tasks. So this is some pictures from our actual experiment. So you can see me, we're actually watching an astronaut install the express rack locker into the express rack in this picture. And so I was very, very excited to be able to watch all this happen live. We got a video feed from the ISS. And then you can see on the computer screen in front of me, that is actually a voice communication software that I was able to use to talk to mission control as the astronaut was doing all of the steps to install our payload to just make sure that everything went smoothly in case we needed to be like, oh, that doesn't look right. Can you check this? Or, hey, that looks great. Thank you so much. And so that entire process went really well. And it was very, very exciting to see the box finally make it to the ISS and get ready to do its thing. So this is a picture of when we actually first made connection to the robot on the ISS. As you can see, we were able to get a video feed from the camera of the robot itself, so we could watch it while it was performing its surgical tasks. And then here's a video I have of one of our surgeons cutting some of our rubber bands. And these rubber bands are really good because A, they do not float off in space because they are fastened down on both ends, which was very important to not create additional debris. But also they're very representative of surgical techniques that surgeons use every day in the operating room. So you'll see the surgeon, he'll reach forward with his grasper, and there is a bit of a lag between the ground and the ISS, so he's moving very slow to accommodate that lag. But he's going to be able to grab the rubber band and stretch it taut before cutting it in a very specific location of his choosing. And so this is exactly what surgeons do in surgery. They pull the tissue tight so that way they can see all the blood vessels within the tissue, and then they cut in a very specific place in order to minimize patient injury and then also to avoid blood vessels. So you'll see he'll bring the rubber band up to robot and he'll be able to cut. Yep. And then he very quickly moves onto the next rubber band. And so we had several different rubber bands available for the surgeons to cut and participate with for the experiment. I'll pause it here. It's actually quite a long video. But overall, the experiment went super, super well, and we didn't really have any issues. So here's a picture of all of us kind of in our control center. You'll see there's a surgeon at the console controlling the robot while it's in space. And we actually had 6 surgeons come to participate in this experiment, which I did not think that there would be that many that were interested, but they were all very, very excited to participate in this experiment. And they even let me have a try at controlling the robot. And so I actually did get to cut one rubber band myself. And all the surgeons were super supportive, saying I should be considered the first robotic woman surgeon in space, even though I'm not a surgeon, but that was very kind of them. But overall, everything went super successfully. And so we were able to tell NASA that we were ready to uninstall the locker, the express rack locker from the express rack and just put us for storage while we wait for the payload to come home. But not before astronaut Laurel Hera here, who helped us out, took a historical photo with the robot. And you can see super small, super lightweight. So we're really excited that it got to go to space. So yeah, thank you for listening to my little spiel. I thought everyone would probably enjoy seeing pictures and videos of the real deal and kind of the journey that we followed in order to get to space.
Yeah, absolutely. Like, how cool is that? Like, thank you for sharing all those
Mhm.
videos and pictures. It really makes it come to life. And like, you really don't think about all those steps you had to take to prepare the robot to go up there. Bravo.
Yeah, thank you. It was definitely like a year and a half of a lot of work.
So tell us what comes next from here.
That is a good question. So we have gotten some of the data back from the payload. We've been able to kind of download it, so to speak, from the ISS, but a lot of the larger data files, we're going to wait to do that until the payload returns home. And so once the payload comes back, we'll be able to be crunching all the numbers and analyzing all the data and kind of see maybe some key takeaways of what we learned from this experiment. And then my advisor and I were just really excited to see if there might be future opportunities to learn more. So we're interested in applying for future NASA grants for maybe more advanced surgical techniques to be done in microgravity, or telesurgery is really important for places like forward deployment environments in the military or in rural places in Nebraska. And so we're interested in seeing where we could send the robot, since it's so small and lightweight, to be able to kind of help expert surgeons spread their expertise to more places.
Yeah, there's so many applications beyond space
Mhm.
travel and doing surgery.
Exactly. Yeah.
So super cool. Well, let's talk a little bit more about you and
Okay.
how you chose this career path. Like, what got you interested in STEM and then in this type of engineering?
Yeah. To be honest, I don't think I uh, really considered myself to be someone who would end up with a career in STEM when I was younger. I went through the process of deciding where you want to go to college, what you want to major in high school. And for a long time, I was looking at interior design and architecture pretty seriously, which I guess it is STEM. But my parents really influenced me to consider engineering because they know that I would always be making things and trying to solve problems. And they had me do job shadowing. And so I followed an engineer around, I followed an interior designer around, I followed an architect around, I followed some other professions around, and that really helped me decide that I was interested in engineering. And so when I went to declare my major when I started as a freshman, I declared mechanical engineering kind of on a whim. I was like, "Oh, this one seems okay," and then I've ended up sticking with it. Never changed my major. So I think just having support of my parents and them encouraging me to try new things and see what it'd be like in the workforce really helped.
That's great. I should mention that for those who are watching this live, if you have questions for Rachel, you can raise your hand or type them in the chat, and we'll get to those. Rachel, what advice do you have for other women in STEM or those pursuing careers in STEM?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think I kind of maybe have two pieces of advice. I think number one, you should advocate for yourself, and that's something that I I have always felt a little bit reserved in doing because I want to be polite. I don't want to step on anyone's toes. But no one is really gonna say and speak for you like you can for yourself. And there's definitely a way to do it respectfully and professionally. But that I feel like a lot of the opportunities that I've been able to have been because I spoke up about something that I wanted to change in my career or in my degree program. And so advocate for yourself would be number one. And then number two, I think don't give up, and not giving up can also mean trying in a different way. And so for a while, I was working at a job, and I could kind of feel that I maybe wasn't being offered opportunities that I was really interested in. And so instead of, continuing to invest in people who weren't investing in me, I decided that I was going to try a different way. And so I went back to school and I found this opportunity, which has been like one of the coolest things I've ever got to work on in my life. And so I don't really see that as giving up. I see it as I found a new avenue to pursue what I love. So yeah,
Yeah, you made a pivot, right?
exactly. Yeah.
Yeah, it wasn't exactly what you were looking for and had the courage to make that pivot.
Oh yeah. And then it ended up being more than what I wanted in the first place. So
Wonderful advice. Does anyone have any questions for Rachel? I know we have a well done there in the chat and saw some
thank
applause
you.
earlier after the presentation wrapped up. Sasha, do you have any thoughts that you would like to share or questions?
Just enjoying the conversation for now, so I'm sure I'll have some, but keep rolling for now.
So, you know, what do you see? You're a PhD student right now.
Mhm.
So,
Yep.
what do you see as coming next for you?
That's a good question. I'm really excited to well, I guess I should say I did change my major when I
Oh,
started
okay.
my PhD. So I have gotten a bachelor's in mechanical engineering and a master's in mechanical engineering, and then now for my PhD, I have decided that I want to do biomedical engineering. So I'm excited to continue meshing medical technology with robotics. But I'm really excited to kind of lean into the more medical side of things as I'm diving deeper into my PhD. And so I still have a bit of coursework left, and then obviously all the analysis from this project. I'll have to do a big write up on it. So I'm kind of excited to lean into looking at the more patient side of thing and how this experiment could help people on Earth. So yeah.
Do you see yourself staying in like an academic environment or moving more over into the private sector? Thoughts on that?
I'm definitely interested in both right now. I've definitely caught the research bug, so to speak. So I definitely want to be involved in kind of cutting edge technology and the boundaries of what we know today. And so whether that be in academia, maybe I'd be interested in a professor role someday, or in industry. I think probably either would be appealing. But I'm definitely happy with my current path right now, and I think the PhD was the right choice.
That's terrific. Well,
Um, I
good.
do I do have a
Mhm,
question. So you mentioned that your parents really influenced
mhm.
your path, and I think, sometimes our parents, they see something in us that we might not even know is there with all the life experience and all the things that they have. So I love to hear that. Have there been other mentors or peers or networks that you have had in addition to your parents that you have, you've been able to lean on or have been of support to you on your journey so far?
Yeah, definitely. I would say my advisor has been a huge supporter of me. Um, I would say to any PhD or prospective PhD students out there, choose your advisor wisely. Um, Being able to work with them and having their support is huge for being able to accomplish your degree successfully and for your mental health. But he has really put a lot of, um, I guess, responsibility to me for this project, and he's really trusted me to see it through. And I think if he wouldn't have entrusted me with that responsibility, I maybe wouldn't have learned as much or grown as much through this project. And so I really appreciate his support in that way. And then we do have a really good relationship where if I'm really stuck or I need help, I can go ask him for his input and his advice. And so I think that is very important for an advisor or like a mentor relationship as well. But I'm very thankful for his help specifically for this project. And then along my journey, I guess throughout my whole engineering career, I think there have always been mentors and people that I look up to who support me, and I'm really appreciative of them.
Awesome.
Mhm.
Great. We have a question in the chat. About the question is, what data are you collecting and how will that data be useful to future work? I mean, we could see the surgical robot do its thing, but then what's the data that's behind that?
That is a good question. So we have a few different types of data. In terms of digital data, we have log files that the robot records during use. And so there's a ton of different metrics that it's recording hundreds of times a second while it's using just as a normal robot for surgical applications. And of course, we leverage that for this experiment. So we are able to see what loads the robot is experiencing and imparting during both Earth-based or gravity-based recreations of what we did in space and then also in space. So we have a one-for-one comparison between what the robot is doing, what it's experiencing here, and then also up there on the ISS. So that's kind of the first type of data. We also have a lot of video data. We have videos of the robot, what it did on Earth that we've downloaded. We've also got videos that are it's still in space on the payload on the hard drives up there. And we felt like video was really important to kind of inform the high level, big picture view of what the robot is doing. The robot camera, the field of view is specifically focused on the surgical instruments, which is what the surgeons want. But as engineers, we want to see everything that's going on. And so we have some camera feeds of the robot that include more than what I shared in that video during the presentation. So some video data. And then I also talked to some of the surgeons that performed this experiment. And I just wanted to hear what their feedback was and what their thoughts were about what we were doing. And I personally think that user feedback is really helpful as an engineer to kind of guide where you need to focus next. So I would also consider that data.
So, like, not being an engineer, I'm just going to try to
Mhm,
cut this down in a way that my brain understands, right? So
mhm.
it's kind of the gravity versus no gravity and
Yep.
the pressure or not, on
Mhm,
that robot and how it's able to operate. And then that lag in communication,
mhm.
maybe from space, as opposed to
Yes.
a surgeon in Omaha operating on someone in Central City or something,
Yeah, the
So it's
lag to space is significantly more than probably anything we really see on Earth because we do not have a wired connection to the ISS. It's all through the air. Versus on Earth, there's giant bundles of fiber optics under the ocean. Like we are all wired up here, so it's very very different.
looks like we have somebody else who commented in the chat saying hello. And I'm a human factors engineer for medical devices.
Nice.
Oh, she wants to share your PowerPoint presentation with her colleagues and that they've been following this on the news. Is that okay for her to share?
I
Uh,
think so, yeah. I could provide a shareable version of the PowerPoint for sure.
and we are recording this and we'll be posting it to the Nebraska Women in STEM YouTube page. So you can also pull this presentation.
Rachel, how big is your team? So, your colleagues, like how big is the team? How many of you are women?
That is a good question. So the team has somewhat changed a little bit over time. Um, Primarily, it's my advisor and I. And then we've also had some undergraduate workers that have been involved in the project. And so, because they're undergraduates, they will graduate, and then we recruit some new ones. And so, of the undergraduates that I've worked with, we've had let's see, six total, and then two of them were women. So that's obviously really great that I've been able to find some other women engineers to work with on this project, including some of the engineers that I feel like have been the most helpful to me, just because that they were very committed to our mission, and thankfully were able to come on sooner before they graduated. So they were able to have a little bit more time with us. There also is some engineers from Virtual Incision. This project is enabled with the partnership of Virtual Incision because they did donate a robot for this experiment and some support software for that robot. And that team, um, there is no women on that team. So yeah, I had to think about
They're
it
in
for a
the
second.
pipeline, right?
Yeah,
We're hearing
exactly.
that there are some in the pipeline, and I know
Some in
that,
the pipeline.
and I know at UNL the College of Engineering is being very intentional about trying to recruit more women into
Okay.
engineering in general, right?
Mhm.
Because there is that disparity. How about at NASA? Did you come across
Oh,
any women?
definitely. So working with our NASA team, I've absolutely loved it. We are about 50-50 in terms of our gender identity mixture, which is kind of cool. And then we also have a wide amount of diversity. So there's a lot of different types of people, different backgrounds represented. And it's just been so refreshing to work with them. Everyone has been so professional and so helpful and so supportive of this project throughout the entire process. So that's been really, really encouraging to see that with the people that go to space every day.
Wonderful.
Mhm.
I don't see any other questions. Do you have any final thoughts you'd like to share, Rachel?
No, just thank you for having me. I've been really excited about this project. It's been a lot of work over the past couple of years, and I'm glad people are interested in it. And hopefully that means we can leverage some of that to help more people, whether it be on Earth or in space.
We did have a request for you to share your email
Oh,
address. I don't know if you
yes,
feel comfortable doing that, but if you want to pop that in the chat real
yes, no
quick before we
problem.
wrap up. Sasha, do you have any final thoughts?
Um, Thank you, Rachel.
Mhm.
It was very exciting to hear what you've been working on, and hear your story. I have a daughter who's a senior in high school, and so I'm like, how do we, steer in the right path? So you told me how important parents are. So of all the parents you
Definitely.
that are on this meeting, like, give yourself, yeah, a round of applause. Also, just for some housekeeping items with Nebraska Women in STEM, we do have our upcoming conference in April that is sold out. So for those of you who are coming, we'll be excited to see you in a few weeks, couple weeks. It's coming up quickly. For those that weren't able to grab tickets, we have so many more opportunities that will be available soon. So stay tuned. The calendar is getting full, and we'll be excited to share more with you and hopefully see you all at another one of our upcoming events.
Yes, we have lots in the works we'll be announcing soon. And I did drop in the the chat a link to a very brief survey to let us know how much you enjoyed this presentation, if we should do more like this. This is the first time we've kind of done a one-on-one interview about someone in their career and their work. So let us know if you'd like to see more of this or not. Other than that, thank you very much, Rachel, for joining us, and have a great day, everyone.
Thank you, Rachel. Thanks, everybody.